This is how you play Snow White and the 11 Dwarfs. The first thing you need to do is to look at how many players you have. You always use one card more than the number of players. So for example, when you have 9 players, you will use the Snow White card and the Dwarfs number from 1 until 9. So that means in a total, you will have 10 cards. You don't need the rest of the cards, you can remove them from the game. First, you need to set aside Snow White and the number 1 dwarf, which is Happy. Now shuffle the rest and put one at the center of the table. So you know this card is going to be between 2 to 9. Shuffle the rest and then deal 1 card to every player. Notice that the cards will always have the white edge pointing towards the center. Now this card in the center, this is Sleepy. This is a dwarf and we don't know what the number is. First, the player who has the Snow White card must reveal her identity. Okay, this is Snow White. Now this game is played between 2 teams. Snow White is on the team by herself. The rest of the dwarfs, they are one team, so they win or lose together. The objective of Snow White is to find who among these dwarfs is the dwarf number 1, i.e. Happy. For the dwarfs, what they want to do is they try to figure out what number this is. Now, this dwarf is named Sleepy, but at the moment, no one knows what number it is. So the dwarfs need to communicate in a way to allow them to find out what number this is, while at the same time, they need to avoid giving too many clues to Snow White, which will allow Snow White to find the number 1 dwarf, Happy. Every dwarf in the game will take 1 turn. Snow White does not take any turn, but Snow White decides who takes the next turn. On the dwarf's turn, he can look at the card of one other player. For example, Snow White decides it will be this dwarf to take the turn. Okay? Now this dwarf knows his own number, but he doesn't know the number of any of the other dwarfs. So to perform your turn, first you turn your card upside down to indicate you have taken your turn. So this dwarf looks at this dwarf's card. Now, this dwarf can share information about what he has seen. There are a few rules about how you share information. Firstly, you cannot directly or indirectly mention your own number or the number you have seen. You also may not discuss the number at the center. So you can give clues in this way. For example, this dwarf can say this number is larger than his number. Or he can say things like both our numbers are even numbers. Be careful how you give clues, because if this dwarf says both their numbers are even numbers, Snow White will know that neither of them are number 1. So we have to be careful how we share information. So this continues. Every dwarf will get a chance to look at the card of another dwarf, and at any time, all the dwarfs can share information. There is one important restriction. Dwarfs may not use any convention or language that Snow White does not understand. So all this information sharing must be public, and Snow White must be listening at all times. So how does the game end? At any time during the game, regardless of whether all the dwarfs have taken their turns, anyone may raise his or her hand to try to take a guess. For Snow White, she will try to guess who number 1 is. For the dwarfs, they try to guess what this number is. Now, let's say Snow White tries to guess this is number 1. If she gets it right, she wins the game and the dwarfs lose. But if she gets it wrong, she loses the game and all the dwarfs win. The same principle applies. If the dwarfs guess Sleepy correctly, they all win and Snow White loses. But if they get it wrong, they lose and Snow White wins. There will only ever be one guess being made in the game. Because once anyone makes a guess, the game will end because you know who will win and who will lose. So this is how Snow White is played.